Hi, what's your name, darling?
My name is Susan Boyle.
Okay, Susan, where are you from?
I am from Blackburn near Bathgate, West Lothian.
Susan Boyle became an overnight sensation when she sang on stage in Britain's Got Talent and made the whole world cry with joy many years ago. What happened to Susan Boyle after all the applause faded away? The woman who seemed so ordinary turned out to be extraordinary, yet her story doesn't end there. Where is she now? And is she still singing? Did she find happiness, or did fame change everything? Join us as we reveal the surprising truth about what Susan Boyle is doing today. The girl no one understood. In 1961, a baby girl was born in Scotland during a delivery that nearly killed her. The birth was difficult and dangerous, and something went terribly wrong in those first critical moments. Her brain did not get enough oxygen, and the doctors made a decision that would shape her entire life. Brain damage, they wrote in her medical file, never questioning their diagnosis, never looking deeper. Those two words became a label that followed her everywhere, defining how teachers taught her, how her family treated her, and how she saw herself. She grew up poor in a crowded household, where money was always tight and attention was always scarce. From the beginning, she knew she was different from her brothers and sisters. Her mind worked in ways nobody around her understood. While other children played together naturally, she watched from the sidelines, confused by social rules that seemed to change without warning. Home was not a safe place. Abuse lived behind closed doors, leaving invisible scars that would last forever. School offered no escape. Bullies spotted her quickly, targeting her silence and strangeness with cruel precision. She became an easy victim because she could not fight back, could not explain why she was the way she was. So she learned to disappear. She stopped trying to connect with people, stopped hoping anyone would understand the thoughts racing through her mind. This was how she spent her childhood, carrying a false diagnosis like a weight around her neck. But childhood was only the beginning of her losses, and the years ahead would demand sacrifices she could never have imagined. A life of loss and sacrifice. Before she even understood what love meant, it was taken from her. There was a boy, someone who cared about her in ways her family never did. Someone who saw past the labels and the silence. But families have power over young lives, and hers decided this connection was not acceptable, not proper, not allowed. They separated them, tearing apart something precious before it could grow, and she never got the chance to say goodbye or understand why. One by one, her brothers and sisters grew up and left home, chasing their own futures, building their own lives far away from the poverty and pain they had all known. They escaped to new cities, new countries, new possibilities, but she stayed behind, trapped by duty and expectation, watching them go, while she remained in the same small rooms where she had always lived. Her parents grew older, their bodies weakening, their needs increasing with each passing year. Someone had to care for them. Someone had to cook and clean and help them through their declining days. That someone became her, not because she chose it willingly, but because there was nobody else, and because daughters, especially quiet, damaged daughters, were expected to sacrifice themselves without complaint. Decades disappeared while she lived this way. The years that should have been hers, the time when she could have explored the world, discovered who she truly was, built a life of her own, all of it was spent in service to two people who had never protected her, never understood her, never given her the love she desperately needed. Her dreams, whatever small hopes she had managed to keep alive inside herself, were pushed down and buried under the weight of daily caregiving. Morning, afternoon, and night, the routine never changed. Medicine and meals, washing and waiting, watching her parents age while her own youth slipped away unnoticed and unmissed. Her world became incredibly small, shrinking down to just a few rooms, a few streets, a few faces. While other people her age were falling in love, raising families, building careers, traveling to distant places, she remained frozen in place. No adventures, no romance, no freedom. Just endless responsibility, and the quiet acceptance that this was all her life would ever be. She could not complain, because complaining was not allowed. She could not leave, because leaving meant abandoning the people who depended on her. So she stayed, year after year, giving everything she had to parents who would never thank her, nor understand the cost of her loyalty. Yet even as she gave up everything for others, a truth about herself lay buried and waiting, a truth that would one day shatter everything she believed, the truth that changed everything. For nearly 40 years, she lived believing she was brain damaged, accepting the diagnosis that doctors had stamped on her file when she was just hours old. It explained everything, or so she thought, why she struggled to connect with people, why social situations felt like impossible puzzles, why the world seemed designed for everyone except her. The label had become part of her identity, a fact she never questioned because medical professionals did not make mistakes about such things. But they had made a mistake, a devastating one that had shaped her entire existence. The truth came later in life, during a medical evaluation that looked deeper than anyone had bothered to look before. A new doctor, fresh eyes, modern understanding of conditions that were barely recognized decades earlier. What they discovered changed everything she thought she knew about herself. She did not have brain damage. What she actually had was Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism that affected how she understood social interaction, how she processed the world around her, how her brain was wired from birth. It was not damage, it was difference. It was not broken. It was simply another way of being human. Even more shocking was the discovery about her intelligence. The same tests that revealed her true condition also showed something nobody had ever suspected. Her intelligence was not below average, as everyone had assumed for decades. It was actually above average, significantly so. The girl they had written off as slow, as limited, as incapable, had a mind sharper than most people around her. For the first time in her life, everything made sense. The social confusion was not stupidity, it was autism. The way she saw patterns others missed, the way she could focus intensely on things that interested her, the way music spoke to her in languages words could not, all of it fit together now. She had spent 40 years misunderstanding herself because the people who were supposed to help her had misunderstood first. The revelation was liberating and heartbreaking at the same time. Liberation came from finally knowing the truth, from understanding that she was not defective or damaged. Heartbreak came from realizing how different her life could have been if someone had seen her clearly from the beginning. How many dreams had she abandoned because she believed she was not capable? How much of herself had she hidden away because the world told her she was less than whole? Understanding herself was powerful, but understanding came too late to change the decades already lost, and her one remaining dream was already slipping through her fingers. Singing in the dark. Music had always been her refuge, the one place where words were not necessary and emotions could flow freely without judgment. She had a voice, a gift she discovered young and nurtured in private, singing when nobody was listening, pouring her heart into melodies that gave shape to feelings she could never speak aloud. Somewhere deep inside, she believed this voice might be her way out, her ticket to a life beyond caregiving and invisibility. So she recorded songs, simple demos made with whatever equipment she could afford or borrow. Her voice on tape, raw and genuine, filled with the kind of emotion that only comes from real pain and real hope mixed together. She sent these recordings to music companies, dozens of them, carefully packaging her dreams and mailing them to London, to Manchester, to anywhere that might give her a chance. The rejections came back one after another, form letters, polite but firm, thanking her for her interest but declining to sign her. Some never bothered to respond at all. The music industry had no room for a middle-aged woman from Scotland with no connections, no experience, no story they could market. Each rejection stung, but she kept trying, kept believing that eventually someone would hear what she heard in her own singing. That persistence came from desperation as much as hope. Music was all she had, the only dream she had managed to keep alive through decades of sacrifice. Then her sister died, the one person in her family who had understood her, who had encouraged her, who had believed she was more than the labels others put on her. The grief was crushing, overwhelming, a loss so profound it silenced her completely. The voice that had been her refuge disappeared, swallowed by sorrow too deep for songs. She stopped recording, stopped sending demos, stopped believing that music could save her. What was the point? The industry did not want her. Her biggest supporter was gone, and she was approaching 50 with nothing to show for all her years of trying. The dream that had kept her going through the darkest times began to fade, replaced by the cold acceptance that some people are meant to live small, invisible lives, and she was one of them. Music, the one thing that had made her feel alive, became just another loss to carry. With music gone and her sister buried, only one more loss remained before the silence became complete. Alone after losing her mother died, and with that death came a collapse so complete it felt like the end of everything. For decades, she had been a caregiver, her entire identity wrapped up in meeting her mother's needs, following routines that gave structure to empty days. Now suddenly there were no needs to meet, no structure, no purpose, just silence and emptiness in rooms that felt too large and too small at the same time. The grief was not simple or clean. It was complicated by years of abuse, by love that had never been expressed properly, by resentment and duty tangled together in ways she could not untangle. She mourned not just the woman who had died, but the mother she had never had, the relationship that could have been but never was. Something broke inside her after the funeral, something fundamental and necessary for living. She withdrew from what little social contact she had, stopped answering the phone, stopped going out, except when absolutely necessary. The world outside her door became foreign and threatening, full of people she could not understand and who could not understand her. Years passed this way, blurred together in isolation so complete it was like living in a tomb. She existed, but did not live, moved through days, but felt nothing, spoke to no one, and heard no one speak to her. The silence that had always been part of her nature became total, surrounding her like walls she could not see, but could always feel. Depression settled over her like a heavy blanket she could not shake off. Some days she barely got out of bed. Some days eating felt like too much effort. The autism that had always made social connection difficult now made isolation feel almost comfortable. A retreat from a world that had never made sense anyway. But before her mother died, there had been a conversation, a moment of unusual clarity between them. Her mother, knowing the end was near, had asked something of her, a promise about singing, about not giving up completely, about trying one more time. That fragile promise would soon pull her toward the most terrifying decision of her life, a single moment that would change everything. One brave step onto the stage. At 47 years old, unemployed, living on benefits, invisible to the world, she made a decision that defied everything her life had taught her. She would audition for Britain's Got Talent, a television show watched by millions, a stage where dreams came true or died, in front of cameras that broadcast every moment to a judging public. It was insane, really. She had no performance experience, no stage presence, no reason to believe she would be anything other than another forgettable audition in a long day of forgettable auditions. But the promise to her mother echoed in her mind, and somewhere beneath the depression and isolation, a tiny spark of hope still flickered. Walking onto that stage, she looked exactly like what she was. A frumpy, middle-aged woman in a simple dress, hair unstyled, makeup minimal. Nothing about her appearance suggesting star quality or talent. The audience saw her and made instant judgments, the kind people always made about her. Dismissive glances, barely concealed smirks, the expectation of embarrassment about to unfold. The judges sat behind their desk looking skeptical and slightly bored. They had seen thousands of auditions, and this woman shuffling nervously before them did not look promising. Simon Cowell, famously harsh and difficult to impress, raised an eyebrow when she announced she was 47 and had never had a boyfriend, never been kissed. The audience laughed, not cruelly, but not kindly either. Just another odd contestant with delusions about talent. Then she sang, and everything changed in the space between one breath and the next. Her voice poured out, powerful and pure, carrying emotions that hit like physical force. The audience gasped, literally gasped, shock registering on every face. The judges' expressions transformed from skepticism to disbelief to genuine awe. This was not the voice they expected from the woman they saw, not even close. She sang, "I Dreamed a Dream," from Les Miserables, every word heavy with the weight of her unlived life, every note carrying decades of pain and hope. The performance was not technically perfect, but it was real, devastatingly real, and that realness connected with something deep in everyone watching. When she finished, the audience erupted, a standing ovation that went on and on. The judges fell over themselves with praise, with apologies for doubting her, with predictions of greatness. Overnight, everything changed. The standing ovation was just the beginning, and what came next would prove that dreams coming true can be as dangerous as dreams denied. Fame came too fast. The audition video was within hours, spreading across the internet like wildfire. YouTube views climbed into the millions, then tens of millions, breaking records for how quickly a performance could capture global attention. People in countries she had never heard of were watching her sing, sharing the video, crying at their computers as they listened to her voice and learned her story. Suddenly, the woman nobody had noticed for 47 years was everywhere. News programs wanted interviews, talk shows competed for her appearance. Newspapers wrote features about the frumpy Scottish singer who had shocked the world. Her face appeared on magazine covers, her name trended on social media. Complete strangers stopped her on the street, asking for photographs and autographs. The attention was overwhelming, a tsunami of fame that would have challenged even someone experienced with public life. For her, with her autism and decades of isolation, it was absolutely terrifying. The social demands were endless and exhausting. Cameras followed her constantly. Reporters shouted questions. Producers pushed her into situations she did not understand and could not navigate comfortably. She advanced through the competition rounds, each performance adding to her legend, each appearance generating more headlines. The public fell in love with her story, the underdog narrative of a woman dismissed and overlooked, finally getting her chance to shine. But the pressure kept building, expectations growing heavier with each passing week. Behind the scenes, she was struggling desperately. The noise and chaos of the production, the constant social interaction, the inability to retreat into her usual solitude, all of it pushed her nervous system to the breaking point. Sleep became impossible. Anxiety became constant. Her body started shutting down under stress it was never designed to handle. The Britain's Got Talent final arrived, the biggest night of the competition, watched by millions across the country. She performed well, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. But when the votes were counted, she came in second place. Not the winner, not the fairy tale ending everyone expected, just the runner-up in a talent show. For someone else, second place might have felt like victory, like vindication, like the beginning of a successful career. For her, in her fragile state, it felt like failure, like proof that she was not good enough, that the initial excitement had been a fluke, and now reality was reasserting itself. The emotional collapse came quickly after the final results were announced. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and despair. She broke down completely, overwhelmed by months of pressure, by the gap between expectations and reality, by the crushing weight of global attention she had never asked for and did not know how to handle. Within days, she was hospitalized, her physical and mental health in crisis. The media that had celebrated her now worried about her, speculation running wild about her condition, about whether fame had destroyed her, about whether the fairy tale had turned into a tragedy nobody saw coming. But the woman who had survived 47 years of invisibility was stronger than anyone knew, and her story was far from over. Turning pain into power. The hospitalization could have ended everything. Could have been the moment she retreated back into obscurity and safety, disappearing from public view and returning to the small, quiet life she had always known. Many people expected exactly that, assumed the pressure had broken her permanently, that the bright flame of her moment had been extinguished by the harsh wind of fame. But something unexpected happened during those days of rest and recovery. The overwhelming support from people around the world reached her even in the hospital. Messages from strangers who told her what her voice meant to them, how her story had given them hope, how her courage to step on that stage had inspired them to be braver in their own lives. She realized that her voice mattered, not just as entertainment, but as something more profound. People saw themselves in her story, the overlooked, the dismissed, the ones who had been told they were not good enough. When she sang for all of them. And walking away now would mean abandoning them as much as abandoning herself. So she made the decision to continue, to honor the commitment she had made when she auditioned, to see where this unexpected journey might lead. There was a tour scheduled, performances booked across Britain with the other Britain's Got Talent finalists. Despite medical advice to rest, despite her own terror, she rejoined the tour. The response was extraordinary. Night after night, in city after city, audiences gave her standing ovations before she even sang a note. They were not just applauding her voice, they were applauding her courage, her resilience, her refusal to let the breakdown define her. When she did sing, the emotion in the room became almost unbearable, a collective catharsis happening between performer and audience. Record companies that had rejected her demos years earlier now competed desperately for her signature. The contracts offered were beyond anything she could have imagined, sums of money that seemed unreal to someone who had lived on benefits. She signed with a label and began recording her first album properly, with professional producers and studios and all the support her talent deserved. The album, when it was released, broke records immediately. It became the fastest-selling debut album in British history, shot to #1 in dozens of countries, went multi-platinum within months. Songs she had been singing in her bedroom for decades were now being played on radio stations worldwide, streamed millions of times, purchased by people who connected deeply with the emotion she poured into every note. Success had arrived, but it brought complications that wealth and fame could never solve, and shadows that money could not chase away. The cost of success. Money changed everything and nothing at the same time. Suddenly, she had wealth beyond anything her working-class family had ever known. The kind of financial security that should have solved every problem and opened every door. But money, she discovered quickly, brought its own complications, especially when family was involved. Her siblings, the ones who had left home decades ago to build their own lives, suddenly reappeared with outstretched hands and complicated feelings. Some were genuinely happy for her success, but others saw her newfound wealth as something they were entitled to share, as compensation perhaps for the years she spent caring for their parents while they were free to pursue their own dreams. Arguments erupted over money, over who deserved what, over accusations and resentments that had been buried for years. She found herself in the painful position of having to set boundaries with people who had never respected her boundaries before, saying no to family members who thought her success belonged to all of them, simply because they shared blood. The stress of these family conflicts added to the stress of her new career, creating pressure that manifested in her body. Diabetes developed, a condition that required careful management, regular monitoring, lifestyle changes she struggled to maintain while touring and recording. Her health, already fragile from decades of poverty and stress, became something she had to actively protect. She made choices that confused people who thought they understood how fame worked. Instead of buying mansions and luxury cars, she chose to live simply, in a modest home that felt comfortable and safe. The trappings of celebrity held no appeal for someone who had spent most of her life invisible and was still, in many ways, more comfortable that way. What she did with her money reflected her values and her pain. She donated generously to charities, especially those helping vulnerable children and people with disabilities. She supported causes that had personal meaning, using her platform and her wealth to help others who reminded her of her younger self, overlooked and struggling. Then, unexpectedly, love entered her life. After 47 years of never being kissed, never having a boyfriend, never experiencing romance, she met someone who saw past the fame to the person underneath. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, between two people who had both lived unusual lives and understood loneliness from the inside. It was not a fairy tale romance, not the kind of relationship that makes good tabloid stories. It was quiet and genuine, built on understanding rather than passion, on companionship rather than grand gestures. For someone who had spent her entire life alone, it was everything. But even love could not erase the toll that decades of hardship and sudden fame had taken on her body and mind. The diabetes worsened despite treatment, requiring more intensive management. The autism that had always been part of her became harder to manage under constant public scrutiny and social demand. Success, she learned, came with a price that never stopped being paid. Even as she found love and purpose, her body was keeping score of every hardship, and payment was coming due in ways she could not prevent. Falling, healing, and rising again. The stroke came without warning in 2012, a sudden catastrophic event that threatened to take away the one thing that had saved her, her voice. It happened during what should have been a routine day, her body simply giving out under years of accumulated stress, poor health, and the relentless demands of a career that never allowed enough rest. She collapsed, was rushed to the hospital, spent terrifying hours while doctors worked to assess the damage and stabilize her condition. The stroke had affected her brain, that same brain that doctors had once wrongly labeled as damaged from birth, and now it truly was injured, though in different ways and for different reasons than they had claimed decades earlier. The initial prognosis was frightening. Stroke victims often lose speech, lose mobility, lose the abilities that define who they are. For a singer, the possibility of losing her voice permanently was a nightmare beyond description. Everything she had worked for, the career that had bloomed so late and so unexpectedly, hung in the balance while her brain fought to heal itself. Recovery was slow and frustrating, requiring the kind of patience and persistence she had demonstrated throughout her life, but now directed toward relearning basic functions. Speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, endless hours of work to regain what the stroke had stolen. Some days the progress felt invisible, so small she wondered if she was improving at all. Her voice, when it started to return, was not the same. It was weaker, less controlled, requiring careful rebuilding like a muscle that had atrophied. She had to relearn techniques she had once performed effortlessly, had to accept that her instrument had changed and might never be exactly what it was before. The years following the stroke were quiet ones, spent mostly out of the public eye, focused on healing rather than performing. The media moved on to other stories, other viral sensations, other underdogs to celebrate. Some people assumed she had retired, that her career was over, that the stroke had ended the fairy tale permanently. But she was not finished, not ready to let her story end in a hospital room or a quiet retirement. Slowly, carefully, she began working toward a return, testing her voice in private, building strength and confidence incrementally, planning for the day when she might step on a stage again. That day came in 2025, more than a decade after the stroke, when she announced she was ready to perform publicly once more. The news generated immediate excitement. People who had been moved by her original story now moved by her resilience, by her refusal to stay down. by the courage it took to risk public performance after such a devastating health crisis. The anticipation built as the performance date approached, questions swirling about whether her voice had survived, whether she could still connect with audiences the way she once had, whether lightning could strike twice for someone who had already defied so many odds. When she finally walked back onto a stage, older, marked by illness and hardship, carrying the weight of everything she had survived, the audience rose before she sang a single note. The applause that greeted her return proved that some voices, once heard, can never truly be silenced, no matter how hard the world tries to quiet them. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.